Senator Bernie Sanders, our good friend and my former boss. I was his intern for a year. Joins us on Newsline from the great state of Vermont. Hey, Senator, good morning.
Good to be with you, Bill.
I bet you haven't had as good an intern as you had when I was working with you, right?
You're right, Bill. These kids just can't get the coffee. It takes a mature adult to do it, and we've been missing you ever since.
That's right.
I've heard that the senator runs around saying, you're no Bill Press in the office to the young interns. I don't know.
Senator, what do you think the chances are now that there will be some resolution of this and avoid a government shutdown?
Well, I think I very much hope that will be the case, because the shutdown makes the United States look incredibly stupid throughout the entire world, and it's going to cause a lot of harm for our people. And it just makes every American ask what in God's name is going on in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
I hope the Republicans understand that after trying to defund Obamacare on 40 separate occasions, after running a presidential election on defunding Obamacare, among other things, and losing that election, that is not what the American people want. That if you want to, if you have a political point of view and you have legislation you want to introduce, that's fine. But just because you can does not mean you should bring down and shut down the entire United States government because you want to defund a particular piece of legislation, which happens to be the major piece of legislation passed by President Obama.
Well, Senator, the one who seems to be carrying that House Republican cause in the Senate, of course, is Senator Ted Cruz from Texas. What do your colleagues tell you? Is he getting much support even from his fellow Republicans?
Well, I think there are a lot of Republicans who understand that this is very bad politics for them. That they understand that this is not what the American people want, that you have some leaders in the Republican Party who have made that very, very clear. But I think the more important point, Bill, is to understand that right now our country is hurting. That we have just a recent Census Bureau report came out that incredibly, you may have seen it, talked about median family income today less than it was 24 years ago. We've got an increase in poverty, and the idea of punishing millions and millions of Americans by radically cutting back on food stamps, by radically cutting back on the needs of people who are on the Meals on Wheels program, people who are in child care, is absolutely crazy. I think these folks are going off the deep end. I know that it makes sense to a small minority of Americans who vote in Republican primaries, but I think some of the leaders of the party understand this does not make sense for America.
I'm glad you went there. I have had that in my notes to ask you about, because I thought if anybody in the Senate would have been aware of those numbers and sense the urgency of doing something about it. Here's what I don't understand, Senator. So it showed that 15% of Americans are living in poverty today. Some 50 million people. It also, as you pointed out, the average American family today is making less money than they were making in 1989. But nobody's talking about that, Senator, except for you.
Well, I'm talking about it a whole lot. Look, this is what's going on economically. We had the great Wall Street crash of 5 years ago, and the result of that was horrendous. We were losing about 700,000 jobs a month. Are we in better shape today than we were 5 years ago? We were. But, Bill, what is important to understand is that the long-term trends in this country are toward a disappearing middle class. More people today living in poverty than has ever lived in poverty. It's 46.5 million people. And meanwhile, the people on top are doing phenomenally well. So almost all of the new income in the last few years, 95% of the new income, if you can believe this, has gone to the top 1%. Can you believe that?
Senator, this is Eric Burns. I just want to ask you a follow-up question on that last point. I mean, do you think it's fair to say that when the middle class is suffering, when the working class is suffering, that drags down the entire economy, of the United States, that it really hurts the whole, or is it just hurting those folks?
Well, it is. When you look at what the economy is, the vast majority of the people are in the middle class. They're in the working class. and they are really getting beaten up pretty badly. And in the midst of all of this, this is not like an earthquake that has hit everybody. This is an economic process which has decimated the vast majority of the people, while the people on top are doing phenomenally well. So you now have the United States seeing more and more inequality in terms of wealth and income. Let me just throw out one statistic, though, that the listeners should know. Top 1% in America now own 38% of the wealth of our country. Do you know what the bottom 60% own? 2.3%.
No.
I was going to say 5%. That's terrible.
Whoa.
I mean, and that income and wealth inequality is just growing wider and wider. So in the midst of all of that, our right-wing Republican friends say, okay, well, poverty is increasing. The solution must be to cut back on food stamps by almost $40 billion over a 10-year period, which will drive 4 million more Americans into poverty. The solution must be to maintain sequestration, which will cost us about 900,000 jobs in a year. The solution must be to continue forcing federal employees in the FBI, among many other agencies, to take furloughs. I mean, it is just a continuation of a war on working families, and we have got to fight back and say this is not acceptable.
We're talking to Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont on our news line this morning here on the Bill Press Show. Senator, the focus of the shutdown attempt this week, of course, is over defunding Obamacare. I want to play a quick clip for you of what Senator Ted Cruz, we mentioned him before, from Texas yesterday, said about Obamacare.
Americans all over this country are suffering because of Obamacare. It is the single biggest job killer in America.
Obamacare, a job killer, Senator?
No, that's total nonsense. And, here's what you got. You have in America today 48 million people, Bill, who have no health insurance at all. No health insurance at all.
Right.
What is the Republican plan to address that problem? They have none. There is none.
Yeah.
There is Obamacare.
Didn't we pass it?
They don't have one.
Yeah.
They have nothing. So in other words, 48 million people have no health insurance. We lose, according to a Harvard study of a few years ago, I think the number was over 35,000 people every single year who die because they don't get to a doctor on time. We pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. What's their solution? They have nothing. Mm-hmm. So you can argue, as I do, Obamacare is certainly not perfect. I'm a supporter of a Medicare for all single-payer system. But it is a step forward. Providing health insurance for 20 million more Americans is not insignificant. Doing away with the obscenity of pre-existing conditions, where you can't get insurance because you have had a serious disease, is totally insane. We've gotten rid of that. Making sure that young people can stay on their parents' health insurance is a step forward. Investing in community health centers,
sure,
as the Affordable Care Act is in place. So, it is an important step forward. Should we make it better? Yeah. But do you defund it? No, that's totally absurd.
And isn't, Senator, the reality that those opponents, and I remember you and I had several conversations at the time about disappointed that there's not a public plan option, disappointed we didn't have single payer on the table. But now that we got Obamacare, so Republicans tried to stop it in the Congress, and they failed. They tried to stop it in the Supreme Court, and they failed. As you pointed out at the beginning of our conversation this morning, they tried to stop it in 2012, and they failed. So this is like their last attempt, really, right, to shut down Obamacare.
It is, but it is really, if you look at the political process, if you look at the legislative process, you just don't do this. There are ways to deal with legislation, and they have tried on 42 occasions to defund Obamacare, and they have lost. It is not going to happen. Mm-hmm. And what you're seeing is a bullyish mentality of really saying, if I can't get my way, I'm going to bring down the whole government. That's all. And that is just a very, very dangerous way to be running the most powerful government in the world.
It's really very anti-democratic because this was debated for a year. It was passed by both houses. It was signed by the president. It's the law of the land. We shouldn't even be talking about this. anymore.
No, that's right. It is. It is. I mean, it's just using. They control the House of Representatives.
Senator, can I ask you really quickly, if we have Republicans who are successful in shutting down the government, are our troops in Afghanistan and Iraq going to be getting paid their paychecks, or are they going to be putting their lives on the line and their families are not getting paid if there is a government shutdown?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know that we don't know the answer to that. I suspect that is something the administration is working on right now. There are ways you could juggle around funds. But it perhaps could be delaying the checks that these folks get. I don't know that anyone knows the definitive answer to that. But it is going to cause enormous pain for whole lots of people, I suspect, in the military and outside of it.
Well, let's hope we can avoid that.